Okay, hello, John Dove here from the Advocacy Club. So tonight we've had the first legal session of the Advocacy Club for 2023. And tonight's session is focused on speed mooting. So I'm just going to give some general feedback and some tips based on what I've seen tonight. So our members have been involved in speed moots, and of course they've had skeleton arguments upon which they can rely. So the first thing to remember when undertaking any form of mooting is to make sure that you get the salutation right at the start. It sounds like a simple point, but it can be worth so much in a moot, or rather you can lose points by not doing so in a moot. So just remember at the beginning to say, "May it please the court." If you're for the appellant, remember to introduce yourself and to introduce your opponent, and then you'll move on to your submissions from there. So it's always courteous at the start just to begin with a bit of an introduction. So just give the court a bit of a roadmap as to where it is that you're going with your submission. So just in a very brief sentence or two, just mention how many points you're going to make and what those points are. Now, of course, with speed mooting events, we always provide a pre-drafted skeleton argument. And of course, you're not obliged to use every single point on the skeleton argument itself. So this can be a good point at the beginning just to mention to the court which points on the skeleton argument you are going to address if you're not going to address certain points, and also the order. So you might say, my lord, I'm going to address around 3 points, which will be paragraphs 4, 5, and 6 of the skeleton argument that are, and they give a brief summary of them. I won't be addressing you on point 2 of the skeleton argument. Now, as you're going through and you're making your points, always try and bring it back to your skeleton arguments. So whenever you move on to a fresh point, address that with the court. So I'm now going to move on to the pointers to the special category of persons, which can be found at paragraph 3 of the skeleton argument. So remember, it's a roadmap, and remember to continue to keep the judge informed about that. Same goes for any case law as well. So if you're going to be citing from case law, if you're going to be quoting a specific part of a judgment, make that clear to the judge whereabouts in the skeleton arguments, and of course in the bundle as well. So what one person did quite well tonight was said, I'm going to quote from the case of Pew and Knipe, which you'll find at page 52, paragraph 3 of the bundle. Whenever you're doing that as well, always remember to give the judge that time to find the specific part of the bundle, because if you race on while the judge is still flicking through trying to find that specific part, well, the judge isn't really going to be listening to what you're saying. So make sure that you allow the judge time to find that part of the bundle. The next point I'm going to address is in relation to the way in which you actually present. So sounds might sound obvious, and it's a point that I address quite often, but whenever you're delivering your submissions, try and do so in a nice, slow voice. If you speak too quickly, it's hard for the judge to follow what you're saying, particularly if the judge is writing and trying to make notes. So just remember to speak slowly. And if ever you do make a good point or a significant point, just remember to pause for a second or two. It just adds some effect to what you've said, and also allows that to allows the judge to take in what you've said. All of our mooters have been dealing with judicial intervention tonight, and judicial intervention is arguably the most important part of a moot, because that can be the thing that makes or breaks a moot. That can be the thing that sort of differentiates the two competitors in a moot, particularly if you've got quite a closely contested moot. And sometimes the judge will be looking at how well the competitors can respond to judicial intervention. So preparing for this really starts before you even get into the moot room. When you're going through your papers, you need to be thinking carefully about where the weaknesses are in your argument, or alternatively, where the strengths lie in your opponent's argument. So you need to look at that. You need to think carefully about what those weaknesses are and how you're going to deal with them. So it could be a case of looking at the existing case law, if there's a particular case that really goes in favour of your opponent, looking through any of the sentencing judgments to see if there's any obiter that you can cite, looking for any ways that you can distinguish the factual matrix of the case law, and just looking for any ways really that you can sort of effectively take the sting out of the strength of your opponent's arguments. So really, before you even get into that moot room, you need to think about where the weaknesses are in your case, because you can almost guarantee that's going to form the basis of questions by way of judicial intervention. And then you can formulate answers beforehand. Obviously, you're not going to know the specific form or wording of the questions, but you're going to have a general idea of where those questions are going to come from, and you can think about how you're going to deal with those. The other point that I'll make on that as well is that when the question does come, don't feel the need to rush into the answer. Even if it's a question that you know the answer to, you've prepared for, still just take a second just to think about how you're going to formulate your answer, how you're going to actually respond to that, because you might jump in with an answer and think, well, actually, I could have phrased this better. There might have been a different way that you could have answered the question. So even if you're feeling confident about the answer, always just take a second before you go in. And if you find that you've really been caught out with the question, there are certain stalling tactics you can use to try and buy yourself a few seconds. So you might get a question that stumps you. So you might say something like, I'm grateful for my lady's question. The way I will deal with the question you pose is as follows. And you've just bought yourself 10 seconds, during which time you've got a little bit of time to think. And then as you sort of work through your submissions, you'll then come towards the end. So within your conclusion, you want to effectively wrap up and remind the court of what your strongest points are. And when it comes to the end, you need to finish with something courteous along the lines of, unless I can assist the court any further. So I hope that those tips have been helpful.